Good evening and welcome to a Phil Fuckovitz presentation, a linguistic analysis of front-page positioning of three newspapers, New York Times from America and two from the UK, the BBC and the Guardian. So let's start with the New York Times. And before looking at this, I would say that there are two things that first create the picture or the idea or the feeling or the whatever you want to call it in the mind of the reader. The first is the picture. I think that tends to have an effect straight away as soon as you see that picture. And then the natural thing for a person to do after seeing the picture would be to read the heading. Okay, so in the analysis of each of these three newspapers, we're going to start by looking at the picture and then the heading, and then after that what's around the picture and the heading, which is also reasonably important. So number one, the picture. Straight away you can look at it. I don't know what your linguistic choice is for talking about this picture, but it looks very passive. Obviously, if you've got a sharp eye, then you might see the Ukrainian flag there, but I think most American readers will have no idea if these are Ukrainian soldiers or Russian soldiers. But how emotionally charged is it? Not very, it's very passive. And so I think I'd give that out of a rating from 1 to 5, where 5 is really playing on the emotional side, being a lot stronger with the reader, and 1 is quite soft. I'm going to give that a 1 because I feel like it's a very soft picture. If we look at the title here, we can see that it's just incredibly grammatically complex. It's just wonderful. What's the noun or the subject of the sentence? It's not Putin. It starts with Putin, but he's actually just an adjective here. It's his order. And then what's the verb? The verb is draws. So the actual basic nature of this sentence, the sut, if you like, is that an order draws, and then what does it draw? A rebuke, and it's at the UN. So interesting enough, there is a mention of the Ukraine, but like Putin, the Ukraine is an adjective. It's not actually a main player in this sentence. So the complexity is quite high, which means it's not really looking to create emotional negativity. And also the words themselves, like draws, rebuke, is quite sophisticated. You probably don't understand rebuke or are familiar with that word. And then at the UN, well, the UN's an incredibly intelligent organization. So I'm going to give that title a 1. Again, it's really quite passive emotionally. It doesn't seem to have a strong position against Russia. It's very what you might call factual and informative. Particularly if we have a look at what comes here, which is not as important. US and allies. So straight away you've got a clear subject, US and allies. It isn't an order, it's the US and allies, the good guys. And they've used call out as the action, which is wonderful because it has emotion in it. The good person calls out the bad person. So we know the US and allies are good and Russia is bad. Again, they're not calling out Russia. Russia's again an adjective. They're calling out the clear attack. So again, attack, that's a lot more emotionally charged than whatever here is draws, rebuke at UN, send, order. Ukraine's sovereignty. So again, it's really emphasizing Ukraine here. So I would give that one. That's really quite strong as into emotional, good, bad. You know, don't use your brain too much. We'll think for you. I'm going to give that a 4 out of 5, a 5 or a 4. I'll give it a 5. It's pretty strong. And in order to get an overall comparative statistic as a Phil Fuckovitz, I don't know if this is really kind of Phil Fuckovitz type stuff, but what I've decided to do is take the picture number and the title number and add them together and multiply by 5, and then add that to the supporting number that comes around it. So it'll be 2 times 5, which is 10 for the picture and the main title, and then the surrounding information is a 5. So the New York Times gets a total of 15 in its positioning. Let's hop over to the Guardian and have a look at that one there. We'll start, this I think was the first picture that came up, and you can see straight away things are a lot clearer. Zelensky says. So you have a very clear actor. It's not an order. It's not a thing. It's a human being, and that human being is projecting an idea, and the idea is we're not afraid. So straight away, it's targeting the emotions. Think about the language difference, like enclave draws rebuke. And then, man, if Zelensky says we're not afraid, that's like A1 level language. It's just so easy. And then they've got Putin, and Putin orders. It's not Putin's order. Putin orders the troops over the border, over the border. So that's definitely more emotional. It's more of a vivid action picture. What was here about Putin? Putin's order to send troops to Ukraine enclaves. So this one here doesn't say into the Ukraine, but I would say I'm going to give it a 4 there. Now, I started with looking at the title and not the picture because the title Zelensky references the politician, the president of the Ukraine, Zelensky. And so they're really trying to create the idea of who's the good side and who's the bad side here. The New York Times one was kind of, well, I mean, it does make it clear who's good and who's bad, but they don't say anything about what the Ukraine's actually doing. It's more about US allies and UN. Also, this one has a tank turret there, makes it look a lot more threatening. And then as the picture changes, another one of the pictures was this one here. And that's obviously a lot more emotional. This one not very, but it quickly scrolls to this one. So I think I'll give it a 4 for the title, and probably, I mean, those tanks and Zelensky together, if someone looks at it for more than 2 seconds, which is possible, then I'll give it a 5. What about what's coming around it? Well, Putin's angry spectacle, there's negativity around it. This one here, angry spectacle, the flawed films of Ukrainian attacks, and then a bit lower, it's not on the screen there, Russia strongly condemned. Okay, so the surrounding language, Russia strongly condemned down here. So straight away, Russia, strongly, very emotional language, and condemned, very negatively charged language. Russia strongly condemned at UN. It's very interesting to compare that to the New York Times language of, at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, President Vladimir Putin roundly condemned. It took a long while to get to the negativity. It's very factual, and then roundly condemned is fairly strong, but again, it's more intelligent than this Russia strongly condemned. You know, so that's a bit more than A1 this time. But again, dismay and condemnation. So definitely a 5 for the surrounding language there. We'll give that a 5. Coming back to that previous one, 5 and a 4, 9, that's 18. And then 18 is 5. That rocks it up at a 23. Compared to the New York Times one of 15, 23, you can see it gets a much higher rating on my Phil Fuckovitz statistical analysis of these front page news. And the one that gave me the shock, right? The New York Times has been very intelligent, which is strange for me because in Trump's 4 years of presidency, it was very simplistic, very emotional, much more emotional than The Guardian that you just saw then. But they've really changed how they project. Maybe they have a new editor. I'm not 100% sure. It's very, very different. Even in the Navalny prisoning case, again, it was quite intelligent, analytical, and informative rather than emotional. So this New York Times has been very consistent in its front page positioning, relevant to Russian news, political news. The Guardian has also been quite consistent. This is how it's been constantly. More negative pictures, more emotional language, simpler, closer to the tabloid style, really. And then the one that gave me the shock, the one that's really changed, is the BBC. First of all, first and foremost, the picture. Now, context creates meaning. Boris Johnson is incredibly unpopular in England, in the UK at the moment. Incredibly unpopular because he broke his own mandates about socializing during the coronavirus period. And so if you look at The Guardian, I don't think Johnson was in any of the pictures there. They want to create negativity about Russia here, positivity about the Ukraine, negativity about Russia. And currently the worst thing you can do if you want to create negativity about Russia is to use or put the face of someone who is actually more negative in the minds of the view already than Russia and Putin. Interestingly, I read an article in The Guardian about 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks, maybe 1 week. Boris Johnson had flown over to the Ukraine to try and help. And I read the comments in that article, underneath the article, and crazily, like every single comment was just negative about Johnson. Not much about Russia or Ukraine, even though the article is about Boris Johnson flying to Russia and the Ukraine. Everything was just negative about Boris Johnson. A little bit later, there was another article in the same newspaper, The Guardian. It was also about the Ukraine, but there was nothing about Boris Johnson, and about 80% was very negative about Russia, and 20% was negative about NATO. So it was interesting to see the presence of Boris Johnson in the article and how much that influenced where the negativity was going in The Guardian. And so for the BBC to put Boris Johnson there front and centre is a very, very interesting decision indeed. And how would you describe the picture on his face? Like the picture of his face, the look on his face, how would you describe that? I don't know, I kind of see it as someone who's going through some very difficult problems, perhaps psychological in nature, and it's best just to stay away from this guy. So it's very strange because not many people in Britain would associate this with trusting. And then look, Johnson to hold. So not only is the face right at the front, then Johnson's right at the front. Emergency Cobra meeting on Ukraine. There's no Russia. There's nothing there about Russia. There's nothing at all. On Ukraine is just the end topic of the main meeting there, the main object. So I'm going to give that picture. In terms of creating negativity, yeah, but about Boris Johnson, it's really shifting negativity away from the topic. So I'm actually going to give that a minus. It's a minus. I'm going to give it a minus. I want to give it a -4, but you may not appreciate just how negative people are being in the UK about Boris Johnson at the moment. So I give it a -2 for the picture. Johnson to hold emergency meeting on Ukraine, that's like 0. There's nothing there at all. And then what about the surrounding negativity? Will Prime Minister expect to sign off sanctions against Russia? You know, sign off. It's just very easy. He's going to sign off on sanctions, more sanctions, who cares? And then it just gets stranger and stranger and stranger. Russia recognizes Ukraine's separatist regions. So straight away, number one, hey, be negative about Boris, not about Russia. Number two, these are separatist regions that Russia's not invading. They're recognizing. It's like, what's going on? Then the BBC, to give you some perspective on this, not that long ago, New York Times was here in terms of being mildly emotional negative, mostly intelligent. BBC was here and The Guardian was there. It was between the New York Times and The Guardian. So, you know, I haven't been looking at this every day and in great detail, but, you know, this seems to me a very, very big switch. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. And then straight away it goes on to climate change. Now think about that for a second. The person gets negative about Boris Johnson, not about Russia, number one. Number two, they get informed that Russia is just recognizing a separatist region, i.e., yeah, it's bad, but maybe we need to think about that a little bit. Then the next step, they divert it onto a much, much, much larger problem in the minds of the readers in the UK about climate change. It's like, who cares? Climate change. And then again in the minds of the readers, they're England ending COVID isolation. Bigger news. And then the last one is about the meanings hidden in a masterpiece, which I would say is targeting possibly the artistic mind for some and the reptilian mind for others. So that's it. That's the analysis of the three. What are we going to give the BBC? Well, -2 plus 0. So that's like -10. And then the surrounding ones, I'll give it, well, there's a man with a gun and Russia recognizes. There's nothing bad there at all. I'll give it a 0. So the BBC rocks up with a -10. A -10. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. It was between The Guardian and the New York Times. Guardian is still out there, 23. The BBC I would expect to be like 15, 16. Yep. Now there we go. New York Times is 15. Okay, so I'd expect the BBC to be, let's say, 23, 18. The BBC should be 18, and it's come in at -10. I don't know. Who cares? It's just surprising. Okay, so what about the bonus? Now you guys have waited for the bonus. I said I'd look at a non-Western newspaper, and there it is. The front page news. Nothing anywhere at all about the Ukraine crisis. Winter Olympics have come to an end. The president of China, the president of the Olympic Committee, pictures of different happy Winter Olympians. Wonderful, wonderful, positive, everything's wonderful. What about the international section? Well, it's covered in the international section. The first picture / article is of Putin looking quite presidential. So it's, fairly, zero on the previous one. There's nothing there at all. And this one here's actually positive, so it would be a minus score. And then the second picture article rolls through. You can see there it rolls through to the second part there. That's the White House, and it's just about sanctions. It's fairly informative, and it's not emotional at all. So, yeah, Xinhua Asian Chinese newspaper, there's nothing really happening. It's just giving some information.